Kathleen Olive, and today I'm kicking off our series by talking with team member Nick Gordon about Leonardo's Mona Lisa, the most valuable, famous and enigmatic painting in the world. I'm excited to be talking about this artwork, as my research expertise is in the Italian Renaissance, and I've led cultural tours to Italy to explore the art and history of this period since 2003. Did you know that the average visitor to the Louvre spends 17 seconds looking at Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa? But that scientific research also shows that our physical and mental health improve when we stop, slow down, and look closely at a single work of art for a sustained amount of time? In Limelight Arts Travel's series A Closer Look, our experts guide you through the process of looking at a work of art in context, revealing the hidden details and stories that lie behind the masterpiece.
So this is one of the most famous paintings in the world, but I thought as a way of starting, if you could talk us through what it is that we're looking at, please, Kathleen.
Well, Leonardo's Mona Lisa is a portrait of a woman. She is a youngish woman. I'd say she's probably in her late 20s or early 30s. And she has a very gossamer thin veil on her brownish red curly hair. She's wearing dark coloured clothes of shot silk with gold embroidery. And she's facing us in a 3/4 pose with, the longer we look at this painting, a very hazy landscape behind her with mountains and even a bridge. And if we look even more closely, we can see she's actually set apart from that landscape as she looks at us by both an architectural frame that she sits in front of and by the arm of the chair that she's resting on.
So who exactly is this enigmatic woman who stares out at us?
Well, look, she's been known as the Mona Lisa almost since the time that she was painted by Leonardo, beginning from around about 1503. So that's when we know he started work on this piece, and he probably continued work on it until he lost the good strength in his hand after a stroke around about 1517. And so right from the beginning, she was referred to as the Mona Lisa. Mona, by the way, is just a shortened form of a Tuscan word Monna, which is itself a shortened form of the word Madonna. So in other words, Lady Lisa. Mona Lisa just means Lady Lisa. And she was always described by contemporaries as being the wife of a silk merchant with the name Lisa del Giocondo, Giocondo being the surname of the man she married. And for that reason, she also became known as La Gioconda. There was a nice pun there because Gioconda also means content. So she was known both as the contented lady, but also for that name of her husband. And this was a traditional attribution to the person in the portrait that was actually backed up recently by scholarly research in about 2005, when a book was discovered in a library in Germany that actually had a contemporary handwritten annotation by someone who knew Leonardo da Vinci, who wrote in the margin of one of their books that Leonardo da Vinci was currently in the process of painting a portrait of Lisa del Giocondo, the wife of a Florentine silk merchant. So we now know without a doubt this is not the Virgin Mary, this is not Leonardo or his lover Salai in drag, this is not Isis. All of the various conspiracy attributions that have been attached to this woman, it is definitively Mona Lisa, wife of a Florentine silk merchant called Giocondo.
So did the person who made those annotations, that contemporary of Leonardo, did he give any other information about Leonardo or about the painting?
Yes, his name was Agostino Vespucci, and he was a Florentine nobleman, and he tells us that Leonardo never really stops working on the painting. He tells us that Leonardo had embarked on making this portrait of Lisa del Giocondo, but that he never really considered it finished, and that he took it with him when he moved from Italy to France to work at the court of Francois I. And that's in fact how the painting ends up in the Louvre as we know it today. It is in Leonardo's own possession at the time of his death. It seems to pass along with a number of copies of this painting made by Leonardo and some of his the members of his workshop. It seems to pass in a bequest to his lover Salai, and from there it seems to be sold into the collection of the French king. And it's certainly at Fontainebleau by the middle of the 16th century, because the Italian art historian Giorgio Vasari tells us that that's where it is in his own day.
So from the sound of it, he was working on this for a substantial part of his life. Approximately how long was he working on it?
Well, it's almost a period of about 15 years. It's just under 15 years that Leonardo is working on this, and he can partly keep working on this portrait because of the medium. So this is a painting in oil on poplar, on a panel made out of poplar wood. And because it's an oil painting, Leonardo could engage in a technique that he was particularly fond of, and that is adding layer upon layer upon layer of fine glazes of oil paint that allow him to really build up very rich and deep areas of colour on the one hand. And this is an aspect of the Mona Lisa that's harder to appreciate today because of the long conservation history of this painting. But it also, on the other hand, allowed him to do something else that he was really interested in, and that is add a lot of extraordinarily fine detail as he went along. And it was particularly that fine detail that was commented on by Leonardo's contemporaries, who saw this painting as it travelled through Leonardo's career and workshop with him. They saw it and they commented on the fine details, like the embroidery on the bodice of Mona Lisa's dress, for example, or they're very, very taken by the individual strands of hair that you can make out on her head. So these were the aspects of realism that were particularly praised by Leonardo's own contemporaries.
And did that sort of praise remain the same across time, or has this been a painting like, say, Caravaggio's works that has had different fortunes, different interpretations?
She's probably the most interpreted painting in the world, I would say. And we can come in a moment to what it might be that we can still gain from looking closely at this painting and assuming, as I think we should, that this painting is a masterpiece for good reason. So she's been variously interpreted, and from that early praise that's given to the painting by people like Vespucci in that annotation, or people like Giorgio Vasari in his biography of someone like Leonardo da Vinci. By the 19th century, there are lots of comments by intellects and art critics about the Mona Lisa that reveal that by that time she'd actually developed a different kind of reputation, and we get extraordinary comments about her. So, for example, we have people like Michelet, the great French intellect, saying that he was simultaneously attracted and revolted and consumed by the Mona Lisa when he went to look at her in the Louvre. He said that he was drawn to her like a snake is drawn to the bird that will consume it. Walter Pater, the great art critic of the 19th century, someone who really helped form our idea of the Italian Renaissance in the modern age, he referred to the Mona Lisa as a vampire, for example. And this is, this idea of her, both her attraction, the fascination of her face, but also some kind of a repulsion that the painting exercises on the viewer. That's really something that enters into the discourse about this painting in the modern era.
So she seems to have weathered those slings and arrows of the 19th century quite well, given that quite literally millions of people come to see this one painting in the Louvre today. Given that people are often travelling such a long distance to see this work, why is it then that people only, on average, spend such a small amount of time looking at it?
Look, that 17 seconds that the average visitor spends taking a look at the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, I think all of us who have been to the Louvre and seen the Mona Lisa understand that that's partly because so many people are there standing in front of this painting. So it's partly about the physical conditions of trying to see the one masterwork in a museum that everyone wants to see, and the theft of the Mona Lisa over time, the attempts by various people, even as recently as a couple of months ago, to damage this painting or make a political statement of this painting. It's being co-opted by everyone from Andy Warhol to Beyonce. I think that draws people to look at the painting in great number today, and that makes it hard to stand in front of this painting and look at it for a long time today in a physical sense. But I think in a more symbolic sense, it's hard for us to look at this painting for a decent amount of time because it's been rendered almost banal by how famous it has become. It is the most famous painting in the world. It's insured for more than any other painting in the world in the 60s when it travelled to New York for 4 months. It was seen by almost 2 million people in that 4-month period and was insured for $100 million, which was the most any painting had ever been insured for at that point. So I think its reputation has almost created this air of the banal around it. We feel that we know this painting very well and that therefore we don't really need to look at it anymore. But ironically, it's probably one of the masterworks of the Italian Renaissance that most of us have spent the least amount of time actually looking at.
So if you were going to spend more time looking at this piece, what would you encourage us to see in it?
I think what we can see from a very easy first way in is the way in which Leonardo is really working hard to break down some of the assumptions about portraiture, particularly portraits of women in his own time. So you could compare the Mona Lisa with almost any portrait of an Italian woman made before its time, so made before the beginning of the 16th century, and you'll find that most of those portraits are rigidly side on. It's very rare to get to make direct eye contact with a woman, as we do in this case, that most women's eyes are turned away from us or are downcast in order to show a lesser status than the men they would usually be depicted with. So many portraits such as this one would have hung in pendants with portraits of the woman's husband or husband-to-be. So from a very kind of easy first step, we could look at this painting and see it as a revolution in how women can be shown. And this is something that Leonardo returns to again and again in his career, from, for example, just his wonderful pencil preparatory sketch that he did of Isabella d'Este of Mantua, but also all the way through to his extraordinary Lady with an Ermine, which is in Poland today. So certainly we could begin by thinking about the ways in which Leonardo revolutionizes the portraiture of women in the Renaissance. But I think we also need to look a little closer and understand just how groundbreaking his technique is here, and the approach that he takes to physically constructing the artwork.
So you've got that beautiful golden light that seems to glow from the painting, but as well as with the very soft blues and greys in the background. Is his approach to landscape here, this perspective in this deep landscape, revolutionary too, like his approach to female portraiture?
Certainly. So from simply a kind of a construction or a composition point of view, Leonardo is, along with someone like Piero della Francesca, among the earliest Italian artists to be interested in what we might call a bird's eye perspective. So the idea that we see the landscape from above, which requires a different way of thinking about the world. There's been much debate about this landscape. One scholar has suggested it's even influenced by Leonardo's knowledge of Chinese landscape painting. We know that Leonardo made numerous sketches of the Arno River Valley in various roles that he occupied as a military engineer. There's also been a theory advanced that this is quite similar to a real landscape that Leonardo sketched near the villa that this woman lived in the Tuscan countryside. That's the Villa Vignamaggio, which many of us remember from the Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson adaptation of Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, which was actually filmed at the villa where Mona Lisa herself really lived. And we know that Leonardo made sketches there. So we could talk about the landscape from that kind of compositional aspect. But Leonardo was also really interested in landscapes as an indication of the mind and of a person's philosophical and spiritual character. So he himself generally saw landscapes in relationship to what we might, in a modern world, refer to as his own psychology. So where he gives the Mona Lisa this fantastical, extraordinary, hazy landscape behind her that our eye really wants to penetrate into and explore, he's also probably saying something about the psychology of this person as well.
And is that psychology also being expressed, do you think, in the way that she's holding her hands, which are extraordinarily beautifully painted?
They are. I mean, when you look at her hands more closely, you can see, aside from that translucent glow that her skin has, which you referred to earlier, it's just an extraordinary feat of technique. Aside from that beautiful glow of the skin, we also look at her hands and see how they're both softly in repose, but also quite active. There's a real sense of life force and energy in her in that pose that she has. She's both at rest, but also somehow in charge. She has an extraordinary amount of self-possession in both her hands and also in that confident gaze of her face towards us. And this is something that we know directly inspired contemporaries of Leonardo. So Raphael made a number of portraits of women, both real and imaginary, where he sits women in exactly this pose and copies to an extraordinarily close detail the position of the hands of those women. So certainly her hands were something that fascinated contemporaries.
Yeah, well, I think just maybe something, just picking up on something you said earlier, just because while you've been speaking, looking at this painting, you see more and more beauty in it. But just picking back up onto that idea that you mentioned of people going to steal this painting, was it stolen, do you think, in the past out of love and a desire to possess something so magnificently beautiful?
That's certainly an aspect of the reasons why it was stolen in 1911. That's the most famous episode of theft in the Mona Lisa's history. And the person who stole it in 1911, Vincenzo Perugia, he lived with it for 2 years. And we know from his description that he didn't let anyone else see it, obviously, but he took it out and looked at it obsessively himself. So there was certainly an obsessive dimension to why this painting was stolen in 1911. But I think even more an important aspect of why this painting was stolen by Perugia in 1911 is that he really saw it as a key manifestation of the Italian Renaissance. And as a great Italian living in exile, as he thought of it in France, he felt very strongly that this painting should be returned to Italy, that it was a symbol of everything that had emerged in Italy as a result of that time we call the Renaissance. And that's how he ends up getting caught as well, because he tries to present it to the director of Florence's Uffizi Museum as a gift and ends up, of course, being caught. And the Uffizi ends up exhibiting the painting for a little while before they reluctantly hand it back to the Louvre. But certainly I think that's interesting, that this painting that for us is almost impossible to look at closely, in 1911 this was identified by a proud Italian as being a true exemplar of everything that was great about the Italian Renaissance.
Well, we look forward to hearing more from you in future episodes about some of the wonders of Renaissance Italian painting.
Thanks very much, Nick. You've been listening to Limelight Arts Travel's podcast, A Closer Look. It was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land and their elders past and present.